My name is Tim Hand with the Office of Accountability Assessment and Research here with the Las Cruces Public Schools, and we're here today to discuss using a value-added model for educator effectiveness. And the first thing to keep in mind is that this is only one data point within the matrix that makes up educator effectiveness. And as you can see here, improved student achievement is 50% within the model. 25% is teacher observations, and 25% also with multiple measures. So do keep in mind that this is just one piece of the evaluation system. So the philosophy. We're going to do a series of vignettes having to do with VAM, and today's vignette will be over the philosophy of VAM and how that leads to educator effectiveness. So it's very important to understand that VAM identifies a teacher's unique contribution to student learning. And the real difference between this and the traditional No Child Left Behind look at proficiency is that VAM focuses on scale score growth as opposed to percent proficient. So in order to take a look at that a little more closely, let's define No Child Left Behind. So No Child Left Behind, when we take a look at this graphic, No Child Left Behind basically labels students. You have beginning step, nearing proficiency, proficient students, and advanced students based on a standardized test. Okay? And what No Child Left Behind says is there's one standard for every student. This line here is a score of 40 on the SBA, and No Child Left Behind says we need to take all of these students and move them up. Okay? The problem with that is we have different classrooms. So this classroom, if you take a look, a few more beginning step students, a few less advanced students. So this teacher, if we were to use No Child Left Behind saying we need all of these kids to become proficient, this teacher would be at a disadvantage because these students are starting from a different point. So that's where VAM comes into play. Instead of No Child Left Behind, we're taking a look at a value-added model. And this value-added model says take students where they are and see if there's growth in their scale score. So, as you can see, with using a value-added model, if your average classroom grows, then you've done an effective job as a teacher. So that brings us to the question. This is the primary question of looking at percent proficient versus scale score growth. I've asked people, is 27 a good score? And in order to answer that question, we need a little bit of context. So let's get a little bit of context. Now we're looking at 5th grade SBA reading. And the scale score goes from 0 to 80. Now 27, within the context of No Child Left Behind, we can say, well, 27, we're not quite to proficient yet, so maybe it's not a great score. However, let's take a look at a little more context. Let's look at unique information about one student. In 3rd grade, we're looking at SBA reading scale scores for a 5th grade student. In 3rd grade, this student scored an 18. In 4th grade, a 16. And then in 5th grade, a 27. Now can we make a little better judgment about whether 27 is a good score? And I would argue yes. So this screen here is where we really need to take a look in order to understand value-added model. Value-added model says, let's take a look at a student's previous performance on the SBA test, 18 and 16. Then take an average of their previous performance, which gives us an average of 17, and then compare that to their current year, which was a score of 27. So when you take a look at the actual score of 27, and then subtract an expected score of 17, there was a growth of 10 scale score points. So that is basically the philosophy of the value-added model. Where are students when they get to your classroom, and where are they when they leave? Moving on. So let's take a look at just why value-added model. Value-added models provide a sound method to identify a teacher's unique contributions to student learning by effectively using a student's individual prior performance to form expected achievement and then compare that to their actual achievement. Okay, so now let's take a look at the math behind this philosophy. As we talked about before, The math behind it of the value-added score is that you have an actual scale score after the student has been in your classroom. And then there's an expected scale score, what we would expect this student to perform based on their previous history with their SBA scores. So your expected scale score is your previous 2-year scale scores and the average of those 2 scores. And then we compare that to the actual scale score, and the difference is your value-added score. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we're not talking about just for one individual student. We're talking on average for the classroom. So within your classroom, let's take, for instance, this student. This is the same type of orientation that we were looking at as No Child Left Behind, but now looking at it from a VAM perspective. In No Child Left Behind, all of these students needed to come all the way up to proficient, or we're not where we wanted to be. Within a VAM setting, each of these students can either improve or regress a bit or stay the same, but it's the average growth that we're looking at in order to evaluate teacher effectiveness. Okay, the next piece. We're going to do 2 more vignettes that discuss VAM, and one will deal specifically with VAM and equity. The question with VAM and equity is, are there certain situations where teachers are either advantaged or disadvantaged by the types of kids they teach, the subject they teach, and those types of issues? A very important issue when looking at teacher effectiveness. For this presentation, where we're just looking at the philosophy, it's important to know that using this prior performance, looking at a student where they are, as opposed to just projecting that they need to be proficient, accounts for differences in student background. If we have a student coming with an 18, they can grow just as likely as a student who comes to us with a 20 or a 27 or a 30. There's room for growth. Teachers teaching every level of student have an equal opportunity to be successful. And like I say, we're going to do a full video on just really digging into these statements and not taking them at face value. Teachers are also not advantaged or disadvantaged by having certain types of students in their classroom. As we said, we will have further vignettes that will come up and talk about VAM and equity, and we'll investigate each of the statements that we just took a look at. For instance, we'll slice it down by different types of classrooms, different types of teachers, and different types of students within those classrooms to explore VAM and equity. Okay. So how do we get from scale score growth to educator effectiveness? We're going to take a look at a couple examples. For instance, this is actual data from the state of New Mexico that looks at student performance. As you can see over here, this is the math scale scores. And down across the bottom, we're looking at ineffective, minimally effective, effective, highly effective, and exemplary teachers. So as we take a look at these columns here, the blue bar, that's a 3rd grade math score for a student. And for this particular set of students, it looks like it's about a 18 or so. The red bar is what we would expect these students to score based on the average of their 3rd and 4th grade scores. Once again, that's probably at about 17. The green bar is how the students actually performed after a year with the teacher. So as you can see, there's substantial growth between what we would have expected based on the student's previous academic achievement and where the students actually ended up at the end of the year. And that's represented by this purple bar with a scale score growth of about 10 to 12 points. And you can see the reverse holds true. On these, you have the blue, that is 3rd grade math. Red is the expected achievement that we would expect based on previous history. And then green, at about 11, is where the students actually performed, which shows a regression of about 14 points. And this distribution then makes up the range from ineffective, minimally effective, effective, highly effective, and exemplary. It's important to understand that this middle category here, the blue bar, once again, 3rd grade math, the red bar, what we would expect the students to achieve based on where they come, and then the actual 5th grade score. A lot of teachers and a lot of classrooms fall within this range, where students come in and they get 1 year's worth of growth within that classroom. As we discussed, there will be multiple vignettes that go into different levels of detail within the value-added model. One thing that we really want to take a look at is how do we translate this scale score growth into educator effectiveness. And we'll break down the math and take a look at the distribution of scores both at the state and district level. But for now, that's the end of this presentation, and we will look next into understanding VAM as educator effectiveness.